Good morning again, everyone. What a beautiful autumn day. I was so gifted and blessed to come up 64 this morning and look at the wonderful sunrise, and there were glorious clouds in my midst before me. And I was so grateful to be able to acknowledge God's phenomenal creation. Thank you for being here as we come together to talk about our annual report. I have to say, I work with the best individuals, and I mean that sincerely for our staff. They are great individuals, each and every one of them. And together, I believe we pull together prayerfulness, faith, and hope, what's been entrusted to us to have phenomenal faith communities. And so, thank you for your attention. May we continue to pray for the wellness of both our parishes, and God bless you all.
All right, thank you, Father Rob, for that introduction and prayer. Appreciate that. My name is David Pritchard, and I serve as chair of the Finance Council, along with some other very talented individuals. And I know Lisa is here with us this morning. Thanks, Lisa, for your service to this community as well. So my role today is to give you a brief overview of the financial status of Transfiguration. And much like any business, right, all businesses have a mission and a vision, as we do. But also, on the other side of the mission vision piece, there's always the business aspect. So we need to be very good stewards in this community. And I wanted to share with you a couple of things, very high-level comments, and then Dan will walk through some of the detail with us. So first, our balance sheet. So all businesses or organizations like us as well, we have a balance sheet, and it tracks our assets and our liabilities. And we have a very strong balance sheet, very strong. We have about $1.4 million in our assets, and 50% of that is linked to restricted giving, and the other 50% is linked to unrestricted funds. So we have a very strong balance sheet. As far as our liabilities, about $39,000. However, having said that, with a lot of assets, we don't want to keep dipping into those savings, right, to support our operational activity. So much like at home, right, when you need a new furnace, you might have to dip in to the savings just a bit, but you don't want to be doing that each and every year. So it's the same for our faith community as well. As far as costs, you'll see in the annual report, about 56% of our cost is linked directly to salary and benefits. And this is reduced year over year because of so much sharing and the evolution that we have between our two faith communities. But 56% of our costs are linked to salary and benefits. 12% is linked to the school subsidy as we support Catholic schools throughout the diocese. So when you take a look at those two data points, about 70% of our expenses are linked to salary, benefits, and school subsidy. With regards to collections, I hate to bring up this term COVID, but the world has not been the same since COVID in the business that I manage, and certainly in our faith community. So our revenue, or our collections, and our stewardship has seen a drop since COVID, and we have not returned to pre-COVID levels. So this is something that we need to be concerned about so that we don't keep dipping in to our savings each and every year to support our operations. So some of the next steps, and Dan will be going through some of the detail, but some of the next steps and the responsibilities of the Finance Council is to take a look at a 5-year plan or a 5-year budget so we can analyze and predict and forecast what things look like over the next 5 years. We're going to be taking a deeper look at the demographics of our faith community as well, because that is linked to attendance. So it's important that as Christians and members of this faith community that we continue to evangelize and bring people to this faith community. Super, super important. So we're going to be looking at that. Also looking at staff roles and responsibilities between our two faith communities to see how we can continue to evolve, collaborating with each other. And then finally, the CMA goal, I'm going to briefly touch on this, but I think Dan has last-minute update information. Our goal this year is $200,000, and I believe that we're just over the 50% mark. Yeah, okay. So we're in a pretty good trend and path for meeting that goal. So thanks to everyone who prayerfully discerns about their participation in this very important effort. So with that, balance sheet costs, our collections, next steps, and CMA are the 5 big topics that we're going to continue to manage and steward as a finance council of this faith community. So with that, I'll ask Dan to come up.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I echo Father Rob's sentiments. It's a great team to work with. Happy to be here, and a great boss as well. So let's take and there was a nice overview. We'll look at some of the details now. So this is a snapshot of last year's expenses. Our total budget is just over $1 million. And you can see here that close to 60% of that is personnel. These next 2 spots here, this is the school subsidy and the insurance, both of which are set by the diocese. We have no control over that. And really our next biggest expense is buildings, right? Maintenance and utilities is $113,000, and that's about 10% of the overall budget. And really everything else is small and compared to all those. In this pie chart is pretty typical of not just us, but every church and the diocese, and probably often most organizations. Personnel is typically the biggest cost. So in your hands, you have more detail. I'm not going to go line by line. I'm just going to cover a couple things here. This column here shows last year's actual numbers. This was the budget, and this was the variance. And this final column is this year's budget. And by the way, our fiscal year runs July through June. So this is the year that ended this past June 30th. Now you can see here, we were about $61,000 under budget in regular collections. Now, the two or 3 years prior, collections were rising. In retrospect, what probably happened is they were rising and then they hit a ceiling. I call it the COVID rebound ceiling. So we probably overshot our budget for collections last year. And maybe there's other reasons too, because not only did we not hit the budget, we actually were about, was it $5,000 or $9,000? It'll come up on another slide. We brought in less than we did the year before. So we went up for a couple years, and then we actually came down slightly. On the expense side, we were significantly under budget with personnel last year because somebody left staff. But in the one area that we can control, we went over in building and maintenance, and that I'm okay with that. The year before, we spent very little on building and maintenance in comparison. And there's a lot of things that needed to be done. So our total bottom line for the year was a $50,000 operating deficit. However, when you adjust, and I'll explain this in a moment, when you adjust for these 2 factors here, it was about a $15,000 deficit. Now, what is this adjustment? The way we do accounting in the diocese, and this is a diocesan rule, it's called modify accrual. It means when we receive money we book it that year, but the expenses are done on an accrual basis. So there's gifts that we received for youth activities, youth and children activities, and the perpetual charity grants that we give every year. The revenue was recognized years ago. So but we still had the expense in this past year. So that's why we make this adjustment. For this current year, we did not increase our offerings, though we did ask and we're hoping for, and so far we're trending for an increase. We wanted to be safe and say, let's just actually reduce it by a little bit. And then we ended up with this $71,000 operating deficit. We made our adjustments to get to a balanced budget. But here's what I want to point out. This number right here, it jumped pretty significantly. So basically what we said is, if we have to, we'll take about $39,000 from the youth fund to cover, let's just say, salaries, the youth minister salaries. We can do that. The diocese even recommended that we did it a couple years ago. But we'd prefer not to have to do that. Which is why, about 6 weeks ago, I think Lisa Morris, John Conley stood before you and talked about this, increasing offerings. This slide just shows this is our bottom line based on investments, accounts, interests, dividends, capital expenses, and things like that. So the markets, for the most part, did well this past year. This money here was the ERTC money, the Employee Retention Tax Credit money that we applied for 1.5, 2 years ago. Capital purchases, there's more detail in your flyer there, but the sound system is new. What else did we do here? I'm blanking. Nancy, David, help me out. The parking lot, that was this year's money though. Yeah, lighting improvements. There was a number of different improvements, some new toilets, some electrical upgrades, things like that. But you'll see here that our total bottom line was actually a $55,000 surplus. So while I don't like to see an operating deficit as a manager, right, I do have to step back and we look at this number as well. And generally speaking, if we have operating deficits now and then, that's okay. But if we have them every year, that's where there's an issue. And so just to reiterate here, our regular offerings were significantly under budget, but more importantly, they decreased about $5,000 from the year before. And again, we budgeted $39,000 from the youth fund to cover salaries, but we're hoping with increased offerings, we won't need to do that. And again, keep in mind, we have lots of fixed costs, lots of overhead. Those building numbers I showed you before, it doesn't matter whether there's 20 people in here or 500. The cost of lighting and heating it and maintaining the buildings doesn't change. And as you all know, costs continue to rise. Yes? Combined with, no, completely separate. So even though we are, we're in many ways one church community, we are still, by canon law and civil law, two separate and distinct organizations, churches. So this balance sheet is only Transfiguration. All these numbers are only Transfiguration. So speaking of the balance sheet, this was last year, this is this year. Total unrestricted, total restricted or designated. And the restricted and designated are is the building fund. We have a perpetual charity fund, which is designated, the youth fund, which is designated. And here's what I mean by that. We call it board designated. If we wanted to or needed to, we can undesignate that and turn that into unrestricted money. We don't want to have to do that. But here's the good news, is that our assets, our total net assets have grown 4%. You'll notice it's a huge jump in liabilities. Don't worry about that. That was an accounting thing we used to do. We used to pay our bills more like cash basis, and then we switched to modified accrual, which is really how we're supposed to be doing it. So next year you won't see that big jump. But this is the important number to see here, that they increased by 4%. Yes? Great question. It simply means our long-term savings. I believe it's a canon term, or I wasn't familiar with it when I started this 3 years ago. Correct. No horses. No, it's just our long-term savings. All right. So you've seen some numbers here, but my guess is a lot of times I get the question, Dan, how are we doing? We good? What's our bottom line? Right? So we're getting there. I will give you my opinion shortly. But let's look at some trends first. So this slide simply shows, this blue line is regular offerings. The orange line is our total revenue. And you'll notice they pretty much mirror each other. And each year, the total revenue, about 90% of that comes from regular offerings. And the rest comes from maybe program fees or fees for funerals or weddings. Maybe there's some specific gifts that people give, things like that. If we do a fundraiser, it would be there. But the vast majority is regular offerings. And this gray line is our total expense. So what we want to see is this gray line below the orange line. When that happens, that means we have a operating surplus at the end of the year. And for the most part, it has. Now you'll notice these last few years, it's been a little choppy. And again, if you balance that out, it's still not bad. Last year, this just means that last year we had a big surplus, which we did. The year before, we had a big deficit. And again, as a manager, I don't like to see that kind of up and down. But when I step back and look at the context, I'm okay with that. And why do I say that? Well, in the last 5 years, right, COVID happened. The bankruptcy was happening, and maybe there was some reluctancy on people giving. But most importantly, I'd say, was the two churches coming together and making a lot of changes to staffing. In the last 3 years, we laid off a couple people down the road. We changed some positions here recently, and we've shared almost everybody. Our entire staff is now either part-time or shared between 2 or more churches in some cases. And when you have those types of changes, you're going to see that type of volatility. I think this is probably the better diagram to look at in terms of knowing how are we doing. And this just shows our assets. And the top line is our total net assets. And you can see this jump here. I think this was probably when you did a capital campaign and then you spent the money. This here was a couple of large gifts that came in. And when it dropped, that was when we made the payment to for the bankruptcy settlement. But, back in 2015, our total net assets were just under $500,000. And as of today, they're $1.4 million. And unrestricted assets have grown as well. They were not even 200,000, and now they are slightly over 600,000. That's a good thing. And then just to give you an update for this quarter, because again, remember the year started July 1st. And if you watch the videos that I do each month, you might have seen me mention that when we factored in the budgeted collections this year, we actually looked at historical data. in the past, I've simply taken the total and divided it by 12, more or less. There's 52 weeks, but an average. This time around, we took 3 years, and then we found averages, and that's how we did it. And you'll see this blue line here. This is our current year, and while we usually have a huge jump in October, we had a huge jump in September. That could be because there are a lot more people now giving annually, and maybe they just gave more in September. It could be because people responded to the request that Lisa and John made. Could be a number of different things, but we'll have more data soon as October will be closing out here soon. But so far, so good. The first quarter looks good. And here it is in number format. This was our regular collections through September. This was the budgeted, so a bit higher than we had budgeted for. Overall revenue is higher than we had budgeted for. Expenses are lower than budgeted. And so we had budgeted through September a $43,000 deficit, because remember there's ebbs and flows throughout the year, but it was only $17,000. So we're, I like to say, better off by $25,000. So a good first quarter, but I don't want to get too excited yet because it's only a quarter. So you might still be asking, okay, but how are we doing? So here's my opinion. Overall, we have a relatively healthy balance sheet and our assets are growing. And when I say relatively healthy, what do I mean by that? Well, there's churches in the diocese that don't have anywhere near as much money as we do. And there's some that have more. But we can pay all of our bills on time. We're able to respond to unexpected needs. And we can handle some potential and upcoming projects. Now, whether they're needs or versus wants, that's a matter of discussion. For example, do we need a new carpet? Probably not. Might we want one? I'm sure some people do. Do we need new lights right now in this sanctuary? No, but we're getting to the point where we might, because these are old and they're becoming obsolete. So things like that. The parking lot that we just did, I would have loved to have a new parking lot, but that would have cost a couple $100,000. So instead we did some repairs and spent about just under $30,000. So again, those things I just mentioned are all good things. But as David said earlier, as a general rule, we do not like to cover our annual operating costs with our savings. When you start doing that on a regular basis, that's a huge red flag. And this goes for any organization, a church, a business, other nonprofits. When you start using your savings, now, maybe you've got a huge endowment fund and you're living off the interest, but that's not what we're talking about. If we keep having deficits every year, then that simply means we're taking money out of savings. And just imagine if we had a $100,000 deficit every year, right? In 10 years, we could be out of money. And expenses are rising, and if regular offerings don't continue to rise, we will be at that point, right? So then you either bring more in revenue, or you make cuts. And where do we make those cuts? We can't change that, and we can't change that, and we really can't change that. And these 4 categories really don't add up to a lot. This is where we make the cuts in personnel. And the more we make those cuts, the less we're able to do all the things that we do as a staff to serve the community locally and beyond. So, as David mentioned, we are, in the last 3 years, I was working on the budget pretty much a month before the budget needed to be done. And that was not ideal, but that was the situation I was in. I'm happy to say that a lot of things have been accomplished over the few years that I was working on, right? So things like transferring the online system, the online payment system, just a lot of internal protocols and staff changes and things like that. So I'm now able to sit down at my desk and work on a 5-year budget. So as David said, we don't get to the end of the fiscal year and say, oh, wow, cost of living increased and insurance are jumping and now we need to make another cut. We don't want to have to keep doing that. So we're looking at trends and attendance, and we're going to look more specifically at what each person does, and how all this relates to our partnership, our relationship with St. Catherine. CMA is off to a great start. Thank you to everyone that gave early and increased your giving, or have just given, period. And let's see, our goal did go up to 200,000. It had gone down a little bit, I think, over the past few years, and a lot of that, again, was because of COVID. The formula is based on a few different things, and as attendance went down, that was bringing our assessment down. But with everything on the rebound now, I anticipate that that'll start going back up. Continue to go up, I should say. But the good news is last year we met our goal. We surpassed it by $7,000. So thank you to everyone who helped with that. And this year we are off to a great start. I think I did these, I think I flip-flopped these here. No, I'm sorry, looking at the wrong line. So last year we were at 67,000. This year we're at 100,000 as of October 24th. And we're 51% of the way there. We'd love to meet it before the end of the year. So we're really looking for participation more than anything. So when, and you might have heard about some of the goals, which some people have mixed feelings on those, but the diocese is offering some incentives for churches that have 10% growth. But I believe we've met it now, what, two years in a row? So. Questions? No. Father Rob and I just received an email on Friday that from the CFO that it is officially done. Yep. Yeah, go ahead, clap. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Good news, yep. Yes, and the question was if there's anything we need to be concerned about as it relates to the bankruptcy or the settlement. And so the answer is no. It's officially done. The question was, what do I estimate the participation rates to be? As far as what? Participating in donations? Yeah, it's probably a third of the actual registered people. But so when we look at our numbers, we try to look at really who's active, and then there's that category that's somewhere in between. We did do the census this past year. That was primarily focused, however, on getting accurate information on everybody who is already active. So it didn't really change anything in terms of overall numbers, but what it did do is give us updated information for all the folks that are active. And here's why that's important, because I can't tell you the number of times I've tried to call somebody and I call the phone number in there and it doesn't exist anymore. Or I send them an email to an old, AOL account or something. I'm picking on David, I think, his AOL. But, phone numbers or emails that no longer exist. So now we have much more updated information on that and just making it a lot easier for us to communicate with folks. The next phase of that would be looking at those folks that are still in the roles but not really active. And even if those did get reduced through some sort of census effort, they're going to get reduced diocesan-wide. So it won't change things like our CMA assessments or anything like that. I think that, there's it. Yeah, let me get back to you on that. It hasn't changed a lot. I know there has been some upticks, but at the same time, there's been others that have either passed on or moved and things like that. So I think the net hasn't really changed much. But that'll be part of what we're looking at. There's a small committee of us that are looking at things like that, and we will get back to you on that. And if you leave me your name and I could probably respond even sooner. Lisa. If we didn't make cuts, yeah, I mean, it could be as high as 50% over the next 5 years. Yeah. But I think we'd have to we'd have to make cuts. Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, because, when you look at all the program expenses or supplies, they're not much to begin with. And then a lot of the other things are fixed costs. So. Yeah, it's a great question. So it was a gift by a parishioner who she left a bequest, left it in her will. And in that, she wanted some money to be used for children and youth activities, and that was about it. And she really left it up to us to decide how to use that. So, the money was set aside. It's now sitting in 2 separate accounts. One, we have a good portion of it at Communis, which is the fund that is managed through the diocese. And performs really well. I think it's a 10% return, but it's mostly in the stock market. So we put the balance of it in a money market fund at Fidelity to gain interest. And if things, worst case is we just won't gain as much interest. But what we've mostly spent money on up to now is partially funding the youth conference, the NCYC conference, and this past year also the Alpha programs that we've been running. And then, and that's the idea, is to try to keep it for things like that. But in this case, if we have to use it for salaries, we can do that. We would prefer not to. I think you had a hand up. And I'm sorry, that the question was for those listening online in regard to what is the youth fund for? Great, thank you, Nancy. Welcome. The question was if the CMA exceeds the amount, what comes back? And 50% comes back to the parish. I believe we've communicated that, yeah. Yeah, so it has. The number of gifts online has increased. And, it might just be, they're not giving over here, but now they're giving here. So I don't know if it's too soon to say whether it's increased our total giving, but I know statistically speaking, they generally do, because of the fact that now when people are, maybe away on vacation or sick, and they're used to bringing an envelope in, if they set up a recurring online gift, it doesn't matter anymore. So that's our hope and our goal, and I would guess that we're trending that way. But we'll know more over the next few months. We'll be able to take a better look at that. Correct, a one-time thing, yep. Well, it was, yeah, we never budgeted for it in our annual operating costs. It went into the general pot or the savings, if you will. But in terms of income, we did not budget for that. You could say, yeah, it's part of our overall unrestricted assets, more specifically, yep. And you're right, it part of our growth over this last year was because of that, right? If you take that out, it doesn't look as good, yep. Okay, well, if you guys have any more questions, you can always call me here at the office or send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who came, and Dan and David, thank you both for your leadership, and to all of you who are stewards of the parish, time, talent, and treasure, 3 wonderful things for all of us to participate in, and obviously, for those of you who are part of the treasure, you support keeping this going. As Dan said, whether there's 100 people here or 500, we still need to maintain and care for our beautiful campus. So for those of you that financially embrace stewardship of treasure, I am very grateful to all of you. Have a joyful afternoon, and God bless you all.